Hi, it's Beefy and welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, then this is where I post tutorials and breakdowns of my projects. If you're into design, 3D modeling, motion graphics, cinema 4D, X particles and the like, then you're on the right place. So why not start by subscribing today? It will really help the algorithm find this channel and help me make more content. And if you're feeling really adventurous, then tinkle that bell so you don't miss a thing. Hi and welcome to the second video of how to build a model of Mount St Helens using digital elevation maps in TerraformFX and Cinema 4D. If you haven't seen the first video, then I suggest that you watch that first. In that video, I'll show you where you can find your digital elevation maps and how you can use them in TerraformFX to build a pretty awesome reproduction of the volcano. In this video, we're going to create some assets for our infographic, and I'll show you how I created the simple Octane material to texture our model. We'll be using external compositing tags to bring information into After Effects. If you haven't seen my video about external compositing, then I shall leave the link below. There's some great tips about external compositing, the pros and cons, and which plugin you should use. I'll be using the C4D importer plugin. If you haven't used that before, then I suggest that you watch that video. We're going to render our animation out along with a crypto map pass, ready for part 3 of this series. So I will go through my render settings and show you how to set this up. Then finally in part 3 we shall bring this all into After Effects and composite it and apply our callouts. There's a lot to get on with and it's a fairly long video. I did think about splitting this up into 2 videos, but everything is relevant to each other. But don't worry, I've created chapters so that you can follow along at your own pace. So without further ado, let's crack on. Okay, so I jumped into Cinema 4D here and I've created the scene, and this scene I've dropped my model that I created in the last video, and I've split the 3 elements up and popped them into a null just to make this a little bit more manageable. And my scene I've made 30 frames per second and I have 360 frames on my timeline. So what I have here is I have a camera that's orbiting our terrain here, and this is just a simple setup. So I have a circle spline as my camera track, that's at 1809, and so I have my camera with a line to spline, and that line to spline is linked to this camera track. So I'll just drop that into the spline path and I'll keyframe the position. And also my camera, I've dropped a target tag, so it's always looking at the same point. As the camera moves around, our terrain is always looking at the same point. And you can make your model the target, but I like to use a null. It gives me a little bit more control when I'm setting up my scene. And my camera, I've made my focal length is 80, so as it revolves around the terrain, there's not going to be too much distortion in the image. So if you like use a wide angle lens, you're going to see that you're going to have a lot of distortion. So I like to use a longer focal length here, and this kind of compresses the image so you don't get too much distortion. So that's basically it. And of course I'm going to be rendering in Octane later, so I have my Octane tag on here, so that's all ready to go. And my other scene objects, I already created my Octane sky, so I have my HDR piped into my Octane sky here, which is an image that I got from Grayscale Gorilla, and this is just a sky object, and this is the only lighting that I'm going to be using. And my other sky object is just RGB spectrum just for the background there, and I've switched that onto visible environment so that it doesn't interrupt with our GI. And I've also got a torus that I've created here, and we're going to be using that for our smoke plume. We're going to be creating that in X Particles Exposure FX. So I've already created that. I just scaled that down to the size that I want. So the smoke plume is going to be coming out of these lava domes here, and I just scaled that down to a size that I want, and I'm going to be taking that into another project, and we're going to be creating our smoke plume. So that's basically that. So I'm going to switch that off there. And I've also created my nulls, and these nulls, let's just switch these on. These nulls, I'll just come out my camera here for the moment, just so that we can see these better. So I position these nulls around my model here, and I've labeled these are elements that I want to create callouts for in After Effects. So what we're going to be doing is later on we're going to be applying external compositing tags, and then we're going to be rendering this out and compositing this all in After Effects. So I've just got these already just to save some time, and I'm just going to switch these off because we don't need to see them, not at this time anyway. And that's basically the setup, and I'm going to be going through some other things as we go along. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, before we apply our material, I want to create some elements first. So I want to create my contours first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my terrain here, and I'm going to control and drag that out of the hierarchy there, and just create a copy. And I'm going to hide our original model here, and I'm just going to rename this to contour guide, and we're going to be creating our contour guides with this piece of geometry here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come into my front view here, and I'm going to come into edge mode or line mode or whatever you want to call it, and I've already docked a couple of tools here at the top. So I've got explode segments, and I've also got the weld tool. We're going to be using this in a little while, but I've just docked these here just to save some time. But you can find these just by Shift C, and you can just type in the weld, and you can come up with your tool here and just drop that into your toolbar there. I've just done this because I know that I'm not going to be using them, so it saves me looking for things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut some lines through this model here, and these are going to be our contours. So I'm just going to use a tool. I'm just going to press K and J. So K and J is the plane cut tool. So in the plane cut tool, I want to have this on cut all, and I want the plane mode to be local. So it's just all the cuts are going to be local to this object here, and I want the plane to be on the XZ. So we're going to have some parallel cuts along this model down to the bottom here, and I'm just going to keep the offset as 0, and I've set my number of cuts to 20, and I'm put the spacing to about 10. I'm going to make sure that my select cuts is enabled. So what that does is that when I make my cuts, they're going to be selected, and then I just can create my edge to spline easily. So that's basically it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tool, and I'm just going to click at the top of, so I'll just come in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click the top of this model here. Okay, so my edges have been selected there. I'm just going to come into my default view, and that's looking okay. I'm just going to come out with this tool here, and I'm just going to right click, and I'm going to select edge to spline, and this creates my spline here. And I'm just going to pull that out of the hierarchy, and I'm just going to hide this model, and I'm just going to drop that into my archive, so that if we need to return to it later and make some adjustments, then we can do. But I think this is looking fine. So what I want to do now is I want to separate all these splines to individual objects here. So I'm just going to use my explode segments that I already docked here, and I'm just going to press that, and now I have a null that contains all my splines. Okay, so you're probably thinking, like, why on earth did I split all these splines up? and I could just stick them in a fracture object and animate them that way. The reason being is that these splines do have gaps in them. If I come to the top view here, and I'm just going to make sure I'm in model mode, and if I select one of these splines here, these are actually all separated, and if I just put these into a fracture object and animated them with a plane effector, I'm going to have these gaps in my contour, which isn't going to look great. So I'm going to cut through a lot of this here, but I'm just going to go through a couple of examples here, and then the rest of them I'm going to continue offline, and then I'm going to return after. But basically I'm going to go through each of these splines and I'm going to look for gaps. So these here, these two, I want to connect objects and delete, and I want to come right in here and I want to come into point mode, and I want to select these 2 points, and I'm just going to use the weld tool that I've already docked in here, and I'm just going to figure out the best way to join these up. I think this one up here is going to be a good one, and so that's basically what I'm going to be doing here. I'm also going to go through and I'm going to look for these little bits here. See, this one isn't going to make any sense having that in our animation, so I'm just going to come into the model mode, and I'm going to select that one. I'm going to delete it. I don't want the contours to be all cluttered and stuff, so these little ones here I'm just going to delete. I might keep that one. I'm going to delete this one here, and I've got some up here. It does make sense having these in here because they're not going to add anything to the final animation. I'm going to keep that one there. So I'm just going to go through all of these splines, and I'm going to make sure they're all connected, there's no gaps, etc. It's a bit of a bore, but I find this is the best way. I've tried doing it in another way. I've tried using the Insydium mesh tools, the edge spline here, and it works great, but it doesn't work well with rendering in Octane. I just end up with contours that look really segmented. So this is probably a longer way of doing it, but you're going to have a better result at the end of the day. Okay, so I'm just going to crack on and do all these, and then we shall return to the tutorial. Okay, so I think that's it there. This is pretty much, these are all joined, and there shouldn't be any gaps, but if we see any along the way, then we'll be able to eliminate the gaps and stuff. And what I'm going to do is come back into our default view here, and I'm going to turn our original model on, and I'm going to select all these here. I'm going to come into the basic mode, and I'm just going to change the display color just so that we can see them. I'm just going to make this a really bad red there. Okay, so we can see our contours here, and this is looking pretty cool. So I have these little bits here. This one here isn't going to make any difference. I'm just going to get rid of these two here. So I'm just going to turn off this here, so I can select these and delete these without deleting anything else. And I've got a little bit there that I want to delete, and I'm just going to go around and I'm just going to check the places where I don't think I need to have a contour. I don't want this to look like really cluttered. I want it to look nice and clean. Okay, so that's pretty cool there. I think we're in a good place, and so we now need to just crack on to the next part. So basically what I want to do, you can rename these if you want to. I'm not going to go through that process here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a fracture object, and this fracture object I'm just going to name contour. And I'm just going to select all of these here, and I'm just going to drop these into here, and I'm just going to get rid of that null, and I'm just going to pull this down here so that we can see what we're doing here. So what I want to do is set the fracture object into explode segments. So what I want to do now is I want to animate these contours on and off, and the way I'm going to do that is to use a plane effector. So I'm just going to make sure that my contour is selected, and I'm going to select a plane effector. Everything jumps 100 centimeters into the air, and that's because our plane effectors by default affecting the position. So I'm just going to switch that off. And what we want to do is we want to affect the visibility of the contours. So I'm just going to come down to the bottom here, and I'm just going to click visibility, and nothing's happened at the moment. We need to add a fall off. So I'm going to come to the fall off tab here, and I'm going to add a linear field. And as you can see, something is happening already. I'm going to change the linear field to -y. And as I move this linear field up and down, the contours appear and disappear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe this. So I'm going to have it to about here, and I want to come into the linear field, and I just want to put a keyframe. So I'm going to say this is 12. Just keep out everything rounded numbers. This makes it easier. And I'm going to come forward to about 90 frames. And I'm going to set a keyframe at 90 frames, and then I'm going to move forward to say 120 frames, and then I'm going to move this up, and I'm going to round this up to 180. So as we scrub through the timeline here, the contours are appearing and disappearing. I want to start the animation at 90, finish at 120, but then as I come down to, so I'm going to come down to 270 here, and I'm going to set another keyframe here. Just go to 300 here, and I'm just going to put this at, so I'm going to set this to 12 and set a keyframe there. So this will animate on, and this will animate off. So basically that's our contours all made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pop these into a null, and I'm going to call this null contour, and I'm just going to drop our contour elements into that null, and we don't need to see that until we set up our render. Switch this off here, and the next thing that we're going to do is to create our smoke plume. Okay, so I've opened up a new scene here, and I've dropped my torus into the scene here, so let's look at world 0 there, and I put 200 frames on our timeline just to give us a little bit more leeway in our simulation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the filter here, I'm going to turn off the work plane just so that we can see our simulation better. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to Insydium, I'm going to drop an XP system into our scene here, and by default it comes with an emitter, so I'm just going to delete that, we don't need that. And I'm just going to come to the Dynamics tab, and I'm going to open up an Exposure FX. And by default we come with this big huge solver here. We don't need the solver to be that big, so I'm just going to reduce the size of this. I'm going to say let's do 150 by 150 on the X and Z, and I'm going to keep the height to 400 centimeters. And I'm going to come to the front view here, and I'm just going to move this up just so that our torus is sitting at the bottom like so, and let's come to the top view, make sure it's centered, and that's all great there. So I'm just going to come back to our default view here, and I'm just going to move in here a little bit. So by default nothing's happening because we haven't told ExplosureFX that the torus is the exposure FX source. So I'm just going to right click on the torus, and I'm going to come down to the Insydium tags, and I'm going to set this as an exposure FX source, and this adds this tag there. We don't need to change anything in here, we just need to come to exposure FX, and I'm just going to play this, and we're going to see what we got for our default. So that's looking pretty cool. One thing I'm going to do first is this blue box here. This is here for a reason, and this is to help your system calculate your simulations quickly. Just containing the calculations within the parameters of this blue box. So this is the adaptive bounds box, and I'm just going to come down here. I want to switch this off because occasionally you get some cut-offs and it doesn't look good, it doesn't look organic, and it kind of becomes a bit of a hindrance. But because we've reduced our solver to pretty much the size of the simulation anyway, this isn't going to slow us down. So I'm just going to switch this box off, and so I'm going to come down to the adaptive bounds tab down here, and I'm just going to switch that off. So this will help with our simulation here. So I'm just going to come back to the beginning there, and this is our simulation, and it's running just as quick, and that's looking pretty cool. So there's a couple of things here. I want this to be kind of like more straight on the column here, and if I come to the simulation tab and you come to the buoyancy tab here, what I'm going to play around with is vorticity and turbulence strength. The turbulence strength is pretty obvious, you're going to be getting some turbulence, so the higher it is, I'll just put this up to 40, you're going to get like a completely different look for your simulation. So the turbulence is happening, it's really strong here, and it's kind of stopping the buoyancy of the smoke, and that's looking pretty cool, but that's not what I want. So I'll kind of want a straighter column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the turbulence off altogether, and let's just see what this looks like. So it's looking more like a mushroom cloud. I'm kind of liking this. This is a lot more straight here, and I'm really liking that. What I want to do as it rises, I want some more kind of curls going on, so I'm just going to change the vorticity to say 30. So vorticity, that creates curls in your simulation. I'm just going to turn this on, just going to play this now, and you can see that we get some more vorticity here, which is looking pretty cool. This is exactly what I want. I'm going to increase this to 50 and see how that's looking. There you go. So that's more of what I want. I want this to go straight up, and I want it, as it's climbing, it's kind of like curling over and taking over and curling over and taking over, and we're getting this nice variation here in our smoke, and I'm liking that a lot. So it's up to you what you want your smoke to look like, and this is where I'll play around with my numbers and stuff and that. I very rarely touch the top fields here I just find out with vorticity and turbulent strength you can get some pretty good control there. That's looking cool to me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come to the solver tab. I want this to be very defined, so I'm going to reduce the voxel size to 1. And we're going to cache this, so I'm just going to bring this back to the beginning there. And I'm going to come to the Utilities tab and I'm going to open up a cache object. In this cache object, I want to make sure that cache type is external, and I want to make sure the EFX format is OpenVDB. And then I'm going to save this into a folder that I've already prepared. And this is going to be the VDB folder in my project folder here. And I'm going to click OK. And we're going to build our cache. I'm going to let this run and I'm going to come back to you once this is finished. So that's finished caching there, so I'm just going to scrub through the timeline here and we can see what our plume looks like, and it's looking really detailed. And yeah, so that's looking pretty cool there. So I'm just going to run with this. I've got all my cache saved in a folder, so we can choose any of these frames to use in our infographic. So I'm kind of saying, like, if I make a note here that it's around at about 85, it's looking pretty cool. And so what we're going to do, I'm just going to save this just in case I want to come back to this project. So I'm going to save the project and we're going to come back into our original project and we're going to create our material for our Mount St Helens model. Okay, so now we come to the fun part. We're going to add a material to our volcano, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch the base and the base bottom off, because so we can just concentrate on the terrain here. And I've already applied a selection tag to my terrain, and what I'm going to be doing with this, I'm just going to show you where I've applied it. And let's come to the top view here and we just zoom in here. So I just applied this selection here around the domes, and what I'm going to be doing is, because I want to have a little bit more variation in the material on the domes, so I'm going to be applying 2 materials to this model. And we just come back out and come to the default view here, and I'm going to open up my Octane Live viewer, and I'm just going to dock that to the side, and I'm just going to fire this up. And I'm going to come to my scene objects here, and I want to turn these on because I want to have, I'm going to turn the floor off for the moment. And so I've got my Octane sky, that's with the HDR that I got from Grayscale Gorilla, which is one of the ultimate skies of theirs. And I've also applied a texture environment, so I'm just going to come in here, and at the moment it's on white, so I'm just going to make this a little bit grey so that we can see what we're doing. And I still got this torus showing here, so I'm just going to switch that off. We've already done using that, so I'm just going to make sure that this is switched off here. And I'm just going to come in and we're going to start applying this material. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a mixed material. This is going to be like a fairly simple material, and I'm just going to apply that to our terrain here. And I'm just going to open this up. Okay, so I'm just going to arrange things, and I'm just going to pull this right over here, and I'm going to pull this over here so we can see properly. And I'm just going to make this big here, and I could dock this, but I just want to move this around because I need to change the view, etc. and stuff and that. So Right, so I've got my mixture material here and I've got my flow texture here. I'm going to create 2 new materials, and I'm just going to pull these down here. Okay, so this material here I'm going to rename Snow. And this material here I'm going to rename Terrain. So this is going to be our rocky terrain in the end, and I'm just going to change the color of this just so that I can see what I'm doing, just while we're initially setting up everything. I'm going to pipe my snow into material 2, and my terrain is going to be piped into material 1. And we've got this float texture, which is currently set to 50%, so we've got 50% blue, 50% white, and we get this lovely color here. So I'm just going to delete this float texture, and I'm going to bring in a dirt node. I'm going to bring in 2 dirt nodes, and this is the reason why I like using Octane for terrains, etc. and stuff and that, because like the dirt node is a really powerful tool, and I don't think you can do anything like this in Redshift. And this is one of the reasons why I like Octane over Redshift. So I'm just going to pipe in the top one here, and automatically you can see here that we have some effects of the dirt node here. And this is what the dirt node does. It kind of like sticks stuff in crevices, so like you can have dirt in corners and etc and stuff and that, so it kind of like just adds some realism. But it's really good for snow. And what I'm going to do here is come into the settings of the dirt node, and I'm just going to whack this straight up to 10. And I'm going to add some details here, so I'm just going to say like 4 for the moment, and the radius I'm going to set to around about 40. So we've got this lovely snow going on here, but we want the snow to be covering the top, because like snow, I mean, although it gets in the crevices and stuff and that, it settles on top of the surfaces first. So I'm just going to invert the normal, and there we go. This is start of the result that we want. So we want like this nice snowy peak. So I'm just going to come into our reference photos here, and this bottom one here, this is what we based our model on. So we've got some nice snowy peaks, and we've got some nice ice and snow in our crevices here, which is like really cool. So this is basically what I'm going to be trying to build with a material, but I'm going to have a little bit of artistic flair to it as well. So it's going to be something that's going to look good for presentation, and it's going to be a good representation of our model. Okay, so I'm going to unpipe this dirt node, and I'm just going to do the second dirt node, and this dirt node is going to be, so this is going to be the snow in the crevices. So I'm just going to set this one up. And I'm just going to whack the strength up to 10 again. We're going to be changing these values slightly, but I like to whack everything up on full on the strength, so I can see exactly what I'm doing here, and then we make some finer adjustments later on. And the details, I'm going to make 10, and I'm going to change the radius to 2. And I want to have a bit more variation in this. Just going to pull back a bit here. I want a bit more variation in the distribution of our dirt node here, and I'm going to add a noise. So I'm just going to drop this in here, and I'm just going to pipe this into my dirt node here. I want to change this to turbulence, and that's starting to give a bit more variation there. And I'm going to increase the octaves to 12, and I'm going to decrease the omega to say 0.4, and I want to create a projection so I can adjust the scale of everything here. So I'm just going to come into the projection here. I want to change the texture projection to box. I'm just going to come down to the scale and I'm going to lock the ratio here, and I want to increase this scale. I'm going to say about 11, maybe 10.5, and that's looking pretty cool there. So we're just going to have a little scout around the back here and just see what's going on. And yeah, I'm kind of liking that. There's a nice variation there. Okay, so that's done with the dirt node. So what I want to do now is I want to mix these dirt nodes together and just get everything arranged there. Just arranging my nodes there so that everything's tidy and I can see where I'm going. And what I want to do is mix these. So I'm going to add a mix node. And I'm going to pipe this bottom dirt node into texture 2, and I'm going to pipe this into texture 1, and I'm just going to pipe that straight into the amount here. And we've got a kind of mixture going on here, but it's not what we want. So what I want to do is to use a mask so that we've got this dirt node is going to be the top and this dirt node is going to be the bottom here. And the way we're going to do that is to use a image texture. And the image texture is, I'm going to use this TF terrain TIFF that we saved from the last video, and this is the digital elevation map that we created using TerraformFX. So I'm just going to open this up and I'm just going to pipe that into the amount here. And we've got some sort of action going on here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into here and I want to invert this map. So I'm just going to click invert, and now we have something that's looking more like the reference photo that we just looked at. So what I want to do is I want to clamp these values in on this image. So I'm just going to add a gradient. So I'm just going to pull this gradient in and I'm just going to drop it here. And I just want to play around with this, the white and black values here. I want to bring the white down and just bring the black up here, so we can get some more, so we get this more looking like something that we want. And this is looking pretty cool here. Just going to edge this up a little bit because I think I had it around about 87, and the white here I had around about 97. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool to me. So what I want to do now is I want to come into my terrain material here, and I just want to make this look more like make it look more like a terrain, I guess. And I'm just going to come into the diffuse tab here, and I'm just going to add a noise. And this noise is I'm going to make is electric. I'm going to change the octaves to around about 15, and I'm going to make the global scale around about 40. Okay, so that's probably, we can have that a bit smaller actually. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this noise. So hold down Control and just bring this down here. And this noise I'm just going to pipe into the bump, just to give it a little bit more of a texture there. And so the noise that's piped into the diffuse, I'm just going to change some values here. So I'm going to change the color to like a dark brown. So I've got some figures here that I've already used before. So this is 39, 37 and 30. this is going to be a lighter brown here, so I'm just going to 36, 35 and 38. So we have a, okay, so that's not looking bad, but what I want to do, I'm just going to move this down here a little bit just to arrange things. What I want to do is I want to use a color correction, because I want to kind of make this a little bit darker, and although I like these colors here, they're not showing up as I liked in the terrain here. So what I'm going to do is add a color correction, and I'm just going to drop that in there, and I'm just going to play with these values here. I just want to bring the saturation down, so I'm going to bring it to maybe 0.4, and I'm going to change the gamma to 1.8, and I just want to increase the contrast a little bit, so this is going to be 0.065. I think that's what I had before, and we got some nice terrain action going on there, so I'm just going to come in here so we can see, and that's looking pretty smart to me. So the one thing about Mount St Helens is that depending on which way the light is shining, it's going to look different. It's going to look different colors, different times of the day, and usually the sun is rising on the east and setting on the west. So this here is the north side, and this doesn't get as much light during the winter as the rest of the mountain here, but I've got my light currently coming in from the east here, so you got these nice shadows here. So this is kind of like northeast ish, and I'm liking that. But I think in the winter months it's going to be more shadowed in here, but this is kind of like more like preference and stuff. But anyway, let's go back to the material here. So that's pretty much for the material. I just want to make some adjustments to this dirt node here. And the snowy peak dirt node, I'm just going to decrease the strength a little bit. So we got some crevices showing here. So we will go back to if we go back to our reference photo here, you can see that we got some of the crevices showing here. So that's kind of looking good there. And I probably want to bring my radius down just a tad. So we've got some more of this terrain showing here, and the details, so maybe increase the details a little bit, and that's looking good there. I'm liking that a lot. Yeah, I'm liking this action down here. So I'm going to come to the second dirt node here, and I'm just going to decrease the strength a little bit. We don't need it to be so powerful. And probably just increase the radius, see what that looks like. Maybe decrease the details a little bit. It's just slightly there, just so that we can get just so we get some like different variation going on there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the snow here, and snow isn't white. Snow has this blue hue about it, and so I'm just going to change the diffuse color here a little bit, and I'm just going to just make this a very, very subtle blue. Let's just come up here. So this is the blue there. I'm just going to bring this down, and I'm just going to make this very, very subtle, and that's looking great there. I'm liking that. I'm really liking that. I mean, obviously, like you know, if you want to get some more details in here, then you can probably add some more layers. But I just want to keep this a simple material. This is just for presentation purposes, and we just want to get like a nice reproduction of the mountain here, of the volcano here. So that's looking pretty cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to name this mixed material. I haven't done that yet, and this is going to be Mount St Helens. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply a new material to the center here, and we're going to add some variation here. We're going to add some more variation to our model here. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to create a new material. So this is going to be a new mixed material, and this material I'm going to call Dome. Okay, so this is our new material. And I'm going to apply that to, just bring this over here. I just really wish I had a larger screen, but just have to make do with what I've got. And I'm just going to apply this new dome material on top of the Mount St Helens copy here, and I'm just going to apply this selection tag into the selection, and that's now applied. So now we can just start increase this again so that we can see exactly what we're doing here. Let's get that in the center. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to use these two materials that I created before, the snow and the terrain. So I'm just going to drop these in here, and I'm just going to get the terrain, and I'm going to just drop that in here, and just arrange these so we don't get confused what's going on. And what I did before was I didn't pipe these straight into the mixed material here. I just wanted to create another mixed material and then pipe that into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another mixed material, just drag this down here, and this is, we're going to name this so we don't get confused with our mixed materials, and this is the terrain snow mix. And I'm just going to drop this into material 1, and now I've got my snow. Now I've got my snow here, so I'm going to drop that into material 2 on this mix, and the terrain is going to go into the material 1, and we get this nice muddy mixture going on here. And so I'm going to use another dirt node for the terrain snow mix. I'm just going to pipe that in here, and I'm going to whack the strength up to 10 and put the details to 2, and I'm going to change the radius. I want this very subtle, so I'm going to change the radius to, let's try 0.5, see how we go with that. So we've got some of the dirt node going on there, and I want to clamp this down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a gradient. So I'm going to add an Octane gradient here, and I'm just going to pipe that into the dirt map, and I just want to invert these. So I'm going to have the white round about here, and I'm going to have the black down to about here. So it just clamps that in a little bit. So I'm going to take this float texture off here, and I'm just going to use the same snow, and I'm just going to pipe that into material 2 of our dome mix material here. and I'm going to be using a noise to mix these. So I'm just going to grab a noise here, and this is an OSL noise. I'm just going to pipe that into the amount there, and we've already got some of the distribution going on there. So I'm going to use a wavy turbulence, and I'm going to change the octaves to about 10, and I'm going to change the global scale to say like 200 for the moment. And I'm going to increase the contrast by a lot, because I want this to be snow that's there and snow that's melting. I'm going to maybe around here for the moment, and I just want to change the seed to get something that I like. I kind of like that, but I've got too much of the edge happening here, so it's just that's looking pretty cool to me. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the brightness slightly, and maybe just change the low clip here, just so that we got more kind of spread of the snow there. So that's looking pretty cool. And I've got this thing, if we just come around here, that's looking pretty cool, but we still got some of this edge here that's showing. So what I'm going to change the gradient here a little bit. That's looking good there. And if I just come into, maybe just change the, not the brightness here. Maybe let's put this back to -2, and let's just maybe just bring the low clip up a little bit, so we can have a little bit more variation here. And we can change the noise again if we want to. So that's not bad. I kind of like that. So I want to, because I want to kind of show that this volcano is still active. So these domes are still very active. So I just want to show some snow that's melting there, and maybe just change the global scale here. Maybe just bring it up to 240. I like that bit there. That's looking pretty awesome. I kind of like that. So just play around with these values. Don't be scared to just like try things and stuff and that. And if there are little areas where you can see like a definite line going on, if it's just a little bit, it's not going to make too much difference too, because we're not going to be zoomed right in on this model. And if I just come down here, let's just put the camera on, and we just come around here and we just like zoom around here. So I'm going to change the distance of this camera a little bit. I'm going to actually come in nearer. So let's just come to the Octane camera here. Oh, actually no, I need to change the camera track here. So I'm just going to come to the camera track here, and I'm just going to just come in slightly. Because we want this to be seen fairly well on the screen, so I don't have any clipping there. This is looking pretty cool. I like that. So it all depends on what presentation you're creating and stuff and that, but I'm going to have these call outs as it's spinning around, and then we're going to show the contours. And I think this is looking pretty cool. So this is going to be on a 1920-1080 ratio. But I think that's looking pretty smart there. The other thing I have played around with is actually adding a little bit of variation to the snow, and I've used the bump for that. You probably can sort of like get some materials with the normals as well and stuff and that, but I just think a little bit bump sometimes works well. So I'll just come and create a noise, and we're just going to zoom in here, just going to come out of the camera here, and we're just going to zoom in. And at the moment this is just a normal noise. I'm just going to do something like a buoy, which can add some really nice detail. And if we just come out of here a little bit, I just want to look at the side here and just come in here. Okay, so this buoy noise, I'm going to make the octaves like 15, and I'm going to decrease the global scale. I'm going to say 1 for the moment. Yeah, this is probably too big here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that really small, so 0.01. Probably is still too big here, so let's just try 0.005. You can see there's some variation going on here. This is probably way too big, so I'm going to go 0.001. And I just want a very subtle variation going on there on the snow. And if we just change these values, I'm going to put the white to black and the black to white. So then we have, instead of having dips, we're going to have like little bumps over the snow there. So I'm just going to come right in here so that we can see. And so that's not bad. I'm going to disconnect this. This is before, and this is after. So it gives a little bit of variation on the snow there. And if we just come out and just come into our camera here, let's have a look here. That's looking pretty smart. I really like that. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that. So I'm just going to leave this material as it is now. So it's up to you. It's up to you to play around. And I just love using, like, for anything like this, for terrains or making anything look grungy. The dirt node is such a wonderful node. I've never seen that in any other render. So this is probably one of the reasons why I like Octane over, well, one of the reasons why I like Octane over Redshift. And that's looking pretty cool. I like that a lot. So now that we created our material for Mount St Helens, and I think that looks rather smashing, I'm just going to talk quickly about the base. And basically, no pun intended, I've textured this with a simple diffuse material, and in the diffuse channel I have a gradient piped into that with a color correction just to rein these colors in just a little bit. And that's basically it. So if you Google cross-sectional maps of the earth or rock or the ground or mountains, etc., you'll find that there's usually 4 or 5 colors, and they're very, very easy to identify which layer is what. So in my model here, I just want to show that there's thousands of years of deposit and sediment of pumice and sulfur and andesite, etc. It depends on what you're designing your model for, determines like how you're going to display the sediment. I remember doing a job for a local construction company building a bridge over the River Detroit, and they wanted to show the different levels from topsoil all the way down to the bedrock. This diagram was for the caissons that they were drilling into the ground for the hydro towers that were going to supply the power to the bridge. They wanted this diagram to be like easy for the viewer to actually look and see what kind of levels were going down. So they gave me a palette and different textures to put on the diagram. So it all depends on the client that you're actually designing for, and that's going to determine your creativity. So that's the material for the base. So we're going to crack on and we're going to go to the next section. What we're going to do now is we're going to add our smoke plume, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the Objects tab here, and I'm going to open up a Octane VDB Volume, and I'm going to position this over. I'm going to come to the top view here, and I'm just going to position this where I want my smoke plume to be, and let's come to the side view here, and we want this to be up a bit here. We're going to make some adjustments in a minute once we bring our smoke plume in. Okay, so in the VDB volume, we need to add, just open this up a little bit, we need to add our file, and we made our cache. So when we created our smoke plume, we cached everything. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to come to, this is my latest cache, so I'm just going to select, I think it was 82 that I liked. So that's looking pretty cool so far. And what I want to do is, let's just come out of the camera and we'll make some adjustments. So that's pretty high. So I'm going to reduce the size of this, but first I'm going to come into my VDB volume, and I'm just going to come to the medium, and I'm just going to play around with some of these figures here. So my displacement, so my absorption and my scattering, these are the colors that I've got at the moment. So I'm just going to make these kind of yellow, a little bit yellow, because this is going to be like sulfur. It's going to be mixed in with this plume here, and let's click up and we're going to come into here, and this is going to be like a just make this a bit more yellow here. So that's looking cool there. And I'm just going to play around with the density and the volume step, just so I can get something that I really like. So I just want this to be like, you know, this is going to be like a volcano burp. It's just going to be like a little bit smoke. This isn't going to be like a pyroclastic flow or anything like that. This is just a little burp of sulfur and gas and CO2 and whatever and stuff, and that is going to just erupt a little bit. So I'm kind of liking that. I probably want to change the volume step length to something a little bit higher, and that's looking pretty cool to me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reduce this. I'm going to come into my camera here, and I probably want to just pull out a little bit, just to give us a little bit more breathing room here. And I want to change the height of this. I just want to bring this down. And now I'm going to get my target null, and this is what I mean by like making these final adjustments to your composition. So as we scrub through this is going to be just fine. I like that. So I want to decrease this size of this VDB volume here. So I'm just going to select that, and I'm going to come up here and just change this to object mode, and I'm just going to scale this down. Now I scale that down, I just want to let's scale it up a little bit. And now I'm going to pull this down, maybe not so far, maybe just scale this down a little bit more, just to get something that you like. And that's looking pretty cool. That's looking, well, to me that's looking in the scale of the volcano there. So what I'm going to do is come back into here. Now that we scale things down, we need to adjust our medium just so that we can get a little bit more definition with our smoke cloud here. It's looking pretty cool. I just want to make this a little bit more yellow. So we just come through here. That's looking pretty smart. I'm just going to come in here. So it's all down to you how you want to present your model here and stuff. Now I'm just going to make sure that this plume is kind of over this area here. So I'm just going to move this back a little bit. And that's looking pretty cool. So this is like completely different to the original model that I made. The original model, when I created it, I wanted to look like a piece of rock, and so that's the kind of inspiration I went with and stuff. I just wanted to make this look like a model, and I didn't use many reference photos, only just for modeling, and I probably added more detail in this model here so that we can get this nice crevices and nice erosion going on here and stuff and that. So I'm kind of really liking this, and I'm going to end this here. I could play with this all day and pretty much end up with something completely different, but I'm kind of so you can keep playing around with this and tweaking things and tweaking the materials. And to be honest, you can end up down a rabbit hole doing something like that, and there is a time when you need to stop, and I think less is more, and I think this is a good representation of Mount St Helens. I like this better than my original one. Well, maybe not like it better. This is probably a little bit more realistic in the look than my original, but I'm liking that a lot. I'm going to switch on my contour here, and we're going to scroll here, and these splines aren't showing up in Octane, so we need to do some prep for that first. And we're going to hide the VDB in my perspective view so we can concentrate on our contours here. It's up to you what kind of material that you want to use. I'm just going to come out the camera here so we can see exactly what's going on. And first of all, we need to make this visible in our viewport here. So I'm just going to I'm going to right click on the contour fracture object here, and I'm just going to come down to Octane tags, and I'm going to add a object tag, and this object tag is applied, and because it splines, we automatically get this hair tab in our object tab. So I'm just going to switch this on, and this is render as hair, and there we go, we got our splines. So I don't want them to be that thick and clunky and stuff, so I'm just going to decrease these to maybe 0.5, and this doesn't refresh straight away, so I'm just going to switch that hair on and off, and this is looking a lot better here. So it depends what you want this to look like. So I just want something that's going to stand out, so you can I'm just going to use a glossy material, so I'm just going to come to materials, create a glossy material, and I'm just going to apply that to my fracture, and that's looking okay. I'm just going to maybe just change some colors here, just maybe make this like a blue. Again, there's something to do with this object tag here. I'm just going to switch this on and off. There we go. So this is looking cool. If you might want to make this stand out a little bit more, but it's up to you how you want to present this. I kind of want to go with the blue because it kind of goes with the snow. I kind of like that. I like the fact that this looks like it's a solid model. I like that these look like they're solid, and you have some reflection of the light and some variation there, and that's looking pretty cool to me. That pretty much wraps up everything that we need to do before we head into the next video, where we're going to take everything that we created and we're going to composite it all together in After Effects and create our infographic. There's a few things that we need to do first, and the first thing I'm going to do is come to the external compositing nodes that I created. And if you remember from earlier, I explained that these are where I want my callouts to be positioned. So I have these positioned around my model here, and what I need to do is I need to take this information of the position and take it into After Effects. So the way we're going to do that is with an external compositing tag. So what I'm going to do is select all of these, and I'm going to right click, I'm going to come down to render tags and apply the external compositing tag. And these are all applied now, and I'm just going to leave everything as default there. If you want to know a little bit more about external compositing, then I suggest that you watch my video. I'm going to be using the C4D importer plugin for the AEC file, and this isn't a native plugin to After Effects. So if you haven't got that installed, then I suggest that you watch my video, because I explain how you can get the plugin and install it into After Effects. And the other thing I have added to my scene is a floor. So we've come to my scene objects here. So I have a floor, and it's got like a simple material, and this material is a diffuse material, and I'm just using the shadow catcher in the common tab there. Okay, so this is like matter of preference. I prefer doing it this way. I feel that I have more control over my background color, and I just control that through my texture environment there. Okay, so that's just a matter of preference. I just find that when I apply a color onto the floor, it's never the same as the color in the diffuse, and that's probably to do with the environment and the GI, etc. and stuff and that. So, but it's just the way that I like to work on these simple scenes here. Okay, so that's pretty much the last items in the object manager here, and I'm just going to come to the render settings, and I'm going to run through quickly what I've got in my render settings. And the first tab here is my output, and in my output I've got my composition size, which is 1920 by 1080, and my frame rate is 30 to match my project, and I'm rendering out 0 frames to 359, and I have 360 frames on my timeline, but the first and the last frame are the exact same. So I don't need to render out this last frame, because when I bring my PNG sequence into After Effects, I want this to loop seamlessly. So the next thing is in my save here. So I've set up my folder for my PNG sequence, and if we come down to the, let's just switch this one, if we come down to the bottom here, we've got the compositing project file, and I'm going to make sure that this is checked, the save is checked, and my target application is After Effects, and my boxes here are checked. So when I render out my PNG sequence, that means that my AEC file will be saved in the same folder, and this file will hold all the information of my external compositing tags. Okay, so if we just drop down to Octane renderer here, I've left everything as default, but I've checked my use denoise beauty pass, because I'm using a denoiser and I want that baked into my PNG. And if I come to render AOV group, I'm using a couple of passes, so I have this enabled, and I have my folder all set up ready for my passes there. And I'm going to make sure that format is EXR Octane, and the reason is that I want to use crypto passes, and you can only use that with EXR Octane. And the crypto passes I'm using is the material node name and the material node, and these are pretty much the same, and they will give you the same results. If you come to the live viewer here, this is our crypto pass here, both of them there, and they're pretty much the same. I don't need to have both these checked, it's just a personal preference of mine. Okay, so that's all ready to go there, And I think that's everything in our render settings, and I'm just going to go through my Octane render settings. So let's just come here, and my max samples are 2000. So my diffuse depth is 3, and I'm keeping this low because I have an open scene, so I'm not bouncing light of everything to light this object. And my specular depth is 3 as well because I don't have much specular in here. And that's pretty much for up there. My GI clamp is 10, and I have static noise checked, so this helps with noise in PNG sequences. So I just have that checked on, but I should be fine with our render today. And I have my adaptive sampling. So if we just come to the noise here, you can see that this is pretty much, I've eliminated most of the noise there. So I'm just going to be using a light denoiser on here, probably 50 passes, and this should be almost perfect render. Okay, so that's pretty much everything here, and so that's pretty much almost everything. I'm going to be doing 2 PNG sequences, so this is going to be the first one, which is going to be 0 frames to 359, and the second one is I'm going to turn my contour on, and I'm going to be rendering this between 90 frames and 300 frames. So it all depends on where you set your keyframes up. I'm just going to be doing between 90 and 300, and then once I've rendered that out, I'll be taking this into After Effects, and we should be putting this all together. I really hope what I've shown you today has helped you in any way, and you've learned something useful from this. I would love to see what you've made using this technique, so tag me in Instagram at almostdailyrender. And don't forget to like, subscribe and jingle the bell so you don't miss a thing. And as always, any questions, comments, then please leave them below. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next video.